First chapter 16, Fall Down. Into one. Ring a roses, a pocket full of posies, a tissue, we all fall down. While the adults had conversations and continued a more serious meeting at the Kang Palace, the children had been taken outside to a calm pond and tree-filled area to play. I hung out with the other kids who were all much older than me. There was the 7-year-old Mung Bai, Mung Do-hyun's granddaughter, the 5-year-old Kang Ara, Kang Wook's granddaughter, the 8-year-old Kang Byum-seok, the grandson of the head of the Seo faction, and the 6-year-old Kang Chul, who was the grandson of the head of the Dong faction. And now we were all singing along to nursery rhymes. I didn't hate Ring a Ring of Roses. In fact, it was my favorite rhyme. It was greatly inspired by the bubonic plague, and a lot of death is tied into those lyrics. Oh, I would love to one day be such a terror on society that children would sing nursery rhymes about me. I'd love it if the fear I caused would be remembered for a lifetime. That was my one regret from my previous life. No one would remember my crimes. Many of my murders had been claimed by other killers over the years. Many times I was so thorough that I never left any traces of my victims, that the people simply ended up as missing with no case built around them. The failings of the police and justice system made it easy for my legacy to be lost. How satisfied must Jack the Ripper be? He had his name so loved by history, and he got away with everything. It's really the goal of all anonymous killers. In this life, I wanted to put on a show like the fictional Hannibal Lecter. I would display my victims like art. He's like a little doll. Kang Chul poked my cheeks. He loomed over me with his chubby, dumb-looking face. His shadow blocked the sun and distracted me from my thoughts. I glanced up at him. You're blocking my sunshine. Oh, sorry. Kang Chul moved aside and then continued to poke my cheeks. Guys, his skin is so soft. Kang Ara and Mung Bei shyly approached me. They both grabbed one hand and squeezed my fingers. His hands are so soft, they both squealed. For a good while I was hugged by the children and treated like some precious toy. The only one that didn't do this was Kang Byum-seok, who watched me from a distance with curious eyes. Why did you pick the white cloth? He asked. Kang Ara stopped hugging me. Yeah, why did you pick the white cloth? How did you know it was so special? I shrugged my small shoulders. I just picked it. There was no deeper meaning. Wow, you really are special. There were all those shiny things and you picked something so dull. Kang Chul laughed. Kang Ara hit the back of Chul's head. Dummy, he's smarter than us because he picked the thing that wasn't shiny. Didn't you hear what the family head said? He's the first child in to have picked the cloth. He has a bright future ahead of him. When I had my doll Jabi, I picked the pen, Ara said proudly. I picked the sword. A man's got to have a sword, Kang Chul chimed in. Kang Byum-seok gently added, I chose Lady Justice. It's so cool that we all pick different choices, and when we grow up we'll all be heads of our factions in the family. Kang Ara danced with joy at the thought. Ha, are you dumb? Kang Chul sneered. There's no way you'll be the next head of the book faction. Not once has there ever been a girl who's become head of a faction. You may get a business or two, but you're not getting a title. It'll probably go to your cousin, the teenager, what's his face. Plus everyone knows Kang Ho is an illegitimate child. You're more likely to get a position than he is. Kang Ara's face turned red with anger at Chul's words. You're wrong. I'll be the first female head of a faction. I'll prove everyone wrong. Chul sneered again. Yeah, sure you will. I will. Now, calm down, you two. Mung Bei intervened and stood between them. You shouldn't argue in front of a baby. Plus, Kang Ara isn't wrong. Who knows what the future may hold? She may be the first female faction head in Kang family history. In the Mung family, my great-grandmother broke stereotypes by becoming the first female leader. My granddad always reminds me that I can do anything just like my great-grandmother. Mung Bei smiled warmly at Kang Ara. So don't give up. We could both end up being heads of our families. Kang Ara's tear-filled eyes quickly turned hopeful, and she jumped up and down with excitement. You hear that? She yelled. I'll be the next head of the book faction. She jumped into Mung Bei's arms and hugged her tightly. You're the best, Annie. I watched this whole fiasco from the sidelines. It was like a scene from some shitty soap opera. I rolled my eyes. Youth. It seemed so sweet and innocent. But when they grow up, they'll be hit with the reality, the obstacles, and the drawbacks. Sure, they might both become female heads, but it definitely wouldn't be a walk in the park. I looked forward to seeing them struggle and lose their bright, optimistic eyes. Now that I thought about it, Mung Bae had been a main character in overcoming obstacles. She was Song Jae's love interest. They met while abroad, fell in love. She learnt about his traumatic past and brought him into the Mung family and helped him get ready for his grand revenge. In the original storyline, Kang Ho and Mung Bae had never even met in their childhoods. Interesting. Eventually, the meeting in the hall ended. As Mung Bae was being taken away by members of the Mung family, she hugged me tightly and said, "I promise we'll hang out in the future soon." All the children seemed pretty much enamored with me and made promises to soon hang and play with each other. When my family came, Kang Sung and Jun Ki gave me heartfelt hugs and congratulated me on my doljabi, but then seconds later they both left. Apparently, they had to go overseas for some kind of business event. Madame Kang uncharacteristically gave me a small smile and said, "At least you're not entirely useless," before also leaving me there. In the end, the one I went home with was Yong Myong. I expected her to glare at me or mutter some curses under her breath, but she was surprisingly well-mannered all the way home. Even when we got into the car and Minho drove us to the mansion, she didn't say a word. When we got to the estate, Minho was about to take me to my nursery, but then she stopped him. "Don't worry, I'll take him to his nursery. I want to play with him. He did such a good job today, and I feel bad for not being a good mother. I want us to bond more. So leave us alone, Minho." She said this with the most gentle and sweetest of smiles, but she didn't fool me. I felt excitement run down my spine. What on earth was she up to? Minho hesitated for a bit, but he couldn't disobey her, and he gently handed me over. "Do you want any of the servants on standby near the nursery?" "No, Minho, I don't want anyone nearby. If there is even a single servant within even 5 meters of the nursery, they will be fired. I will check cameras later." Minho looked uneasy, but he still agreed and disappeared from Yong Myong's sight. She carried me up the stairs and to my nursery calmly with that fake smile wrapped on her face, and all the while my heart was pounding, my mind was racing. What was she going to do? The door closed behind us. She threw me onto the floor immediately like I was something dirty. My head was saved by the plushies I fell into, but my small, soft body still felt sore. "Who do you think you are, huh? Who are you to humiliate me and my legitimate child?" She held her bulging, pregnant stomach. "Do you think you're worth anything? You are nothing. You are the same as your worthless mother. Don't think you're anything more than nothing." Pfft. I couldn't help it. The chuckles just escaped from my lips. "Huh? Are you laughing?" She looked so confused. "I mean, is this it? Is this all you do? Just throw people around and yell, ha 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 ha. I was just expecting more." Her face turned so red that I could see the veins on her forehead pulsing. She practically ran at me and kicked me. The flat part of her heeled shoe knocked the wind out of my small body. "You're a little demon. What do you know? What do you know about me?" She continued to stomp on me vigorously, but I could still tell she was holding back a little bit. She was also making sure to only hit me in places that wouldn't be seen. No matter how angry she was careful. When she finally calmed down, I felt bruises across my chest and stomach, but I still snorted deliriously. "Come on, Myong, is that really it? Is this all that your hate comes to? Is there no urge to kill? Are you that pathetic?" She looked at me with fear and disgust. "You really are a revolting little shit, aren't you? Stop looking at me like that. Stop!" She grabbed one of the plushy pillows and crouched down onto her knees above me. I knew what she was going to do even before she did it. She put the pillow over my face and pressed down. As she suffocated me, I remembered my childhood as Daniel Slade. That first night with Father Johnson had been similar to this. My body spasmed and convulsed. I fought for breath. My small hands grasped and clawed at the pillow and scratched at Yong Myong's wrists. I heard a loud ringing in my ears. Was this it? Was I going to leave this world so quickly? My heart thudded, but then the pressure stopped. Myong was gasping loudly with a panicked look. The realization had slammed into her like a brick, and her consciousness made her fear what she had done. She grabbed her face and muttered, "What did I do? What have I done?" She ran out of my nursery in a blind panic, and I heard her heels running on the stairs. And then I heard her scream. A shrill "ah" filled the mansion, and then the sound of thudding bang, 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 and then silence. Chapter 17. Fall Down 2. Myong's screams, the thudding and the silence that came after. It could only mean one thing. Adrenaline rushed through me as my heart began to beat with excitement, and despite the injured state of my small body, I crawled through the nursery door, into the corridor, up the landing and to the top of the staircase. When I peered down, there it was, the most beautiful sight. Upon those pristine marble stairs was red. The splashes of blood were like breadcrumb trails leading down the steps. The trail of blood became bigger and messier the further along it went, and it all led to a magnificent display at the bottom. That display was Myong. Her pretty face was even more beautiful with that frozen expression of fear and shock. Blood slowly pooled around her head while piss spread around her ankles. It seemed she'd wet herself. Well, most people do when they're dying and scared. Her pale skin became even more pallid as the life further drained out of her. I wanted to appreciate the sight more, but soon enough the workers had gathered around. The house broke out into panic and screams. Multiple people were calling ambulances, and there was far too much chaos. Interestingly enough, the one person that didn't seem so very panicked by all of this was Min-ho. At first I didn't notice him, but he was suddenly standing behind me at the top of the staircase. He gently picked me up and softly patted my head. He stared down at the scene below with a coldness that I hadn't seen before in his hazel eyes, that usually looked at me with fondness and warmth. "Young master, that right there is karma. She hurt you, and now she has been hurt. That is the way the world should work. Bad people should be punished." I didn't quite agree with that. I'd seen enough injustice to know that the world was rarely so fair. If karma existed, it only came to the weak and powerless. True evil with both strength and power is rarely ever countered, and most people who are strong and powerful tend to be self-interested and evil, because that's simply human nature. Karma doesn't come to the truly wicked. If it did, I wouldn't be in this world. Min-ho carried me back to the nursery. In his left hand he held a first aid kit. It seemed he had been prepared, probably from the moment Myong said she wanted to spend time with me alone. He knew what she was going to do. When Min-ho saw my bruised chest, his face wrinkled with anger. "I hope that bitch dies," he muttered. I smiled slightly. Min-ho appeared to be a very loyal one, and he also seemed smart and capable, but best of all I sensed bloodlust in him. It was buried under all those morals, but it was there. And someone who believes in justice and yet has killer tendencies is easy to manipulate. In fact, I could make Min-ho my hands and feet. "Me too," I said. "Huh, you too?" "I also want her to die. She's mean and evil. Mean and evil people shouldn't be happy." Min-ho's face visibly brightened. His confidence was easily boosted. "Exactly. Evil people don't deserve happiness. People like Lady Myong are so warped and twisted, and they think they can get away with anything. They think they're so untouchable that they could even hurt a child. People like her, even her offspring, would be spawns of the devil. Her and her kind should be exterminated, but they're like locusts. They've infested society with their stench and somehow convinced the masses that they are the norm. They need to be put in their place." Min-ho continued to rant. The more he spoke, the more excited and relaxed he looked. He had probably been holding in all these thoughts for so long, never daring to say them for fear of being ostracized by the people around him. Also, being on the older side and being a senior member of the staff, he had likely seen all kinds of things in the Kang household, things he couldn't stand, and finally he could vent. "You're perfectly correct, Min. They need to be put in their place." I smiled up at him cutely and batted my long eyelashes. "That's why I need you, Min-ho. I need you to protect me from the bad people. You're a good person. I can trust you." It was funny seeing Min-ho's face freeze for a second. His lips curved into an awkward shape, and then soon he was smiling from ear to ear. He bowed towards me deeply. "I'll protect you with my life, and I promise to keep those pests away from you, young master. You're the only one in this household worth serving, the only one that recognizes people of true value." He looked at me like I was a precious gem. "I'll make sure you grow up well, and that you shine, and then we can turn the world to the right direction together." His eyes practically shone with mania. It was better than what I had expected. He was like a loaded gun just waiting for someone to pull his trigger. His ego was also easily stroked, and he had been emboldened by finding someone who he thought was similarly minded. This right direction can easily be turned in my favor. He made me curious. How far could I push him? What could I make this slave do? Who would he kill for me? How far would he go to cover up my steps? How far would he fall for this right direction? I needed to keep manipulating him, and eventually bring him to the point where he can't function or make decisions about his justice without my intervention. I will become as necessary to him as oxygen. I smiled at him brightly, knowing that I would use him very well. After a few hours, the house returned to normal. After Yong-myong had been carried away in an ambulance, the workers cleaned up the mess, and soon those pristine white marble floors and stairs were pure and unstained again. For the next few days, the regular workers tried to carry on as if everything was normal, and they didn't say anything about Yong-myong towards me, but I heard all the news from Min-ho. Apparently, Yong-myong had made it to the hospital fast enough for them to keep her heart beating, but she had been officially declared brain dead and was now a vegetable hooked on life support. The baby in her stomach, my half-brother, Kang Cheon-sa, was delivered in an emergency C-section. However, due to the fall, Cheon-sa's spine had been harmed. He had been born disabled from the waist down. When Min-ho told me this during bath time, I couldn't help but snigger. Min-ho also started laughing with me. "Karma is good," he said. I smiled sweetly up at Min-ho. I did enjoy the way he thought. Yes, karma is good. Yes. Chapter 18. Dragons. 1. After the press caught wind of Yong-myong's accident, it became the biggest topic of gossip. It ended up on the front pages of papers like Business Insider and entertainment tabloids. The story even made it to the news segments of international broadcasters like the BBC. Everyone was wondering what this all meant for the Kang family. Would Kang Jun-ki remarry now that his wife was brain dead? Would the illegitimate child, Kang Ho, become the next heir to the Nam faction since Kang Cheon-sa was paralyzed? What did this mean for the future leadership of the Nam faction, the Kang family, and ultimately the Kang-mung group? If these questions were buzzing about in the headlines and amongst the public within the Kang estate, these questions were being shouted about. The atmosphere had become heavy within the household. Of course, I wasn't really affected by any of this, at least not immediately. I was still a baby, and as a result I wasn't expected to attend any of the many family meetings. The only reason I knew about any of the gossip was because of Min-ho. Min-ho faithfully kept me up to date on current affairs and the latest headlines. I had requested for him to do this for me, telling him innocently that I like the news. So it became a ritual of ours. Each morning, while we went out on our tour around the Kang estate, Min-ho would read me the news and tell me about the latest developments in the family. Of course, he never told me this seriously. He'd always put on a storytelling voice like one of those annoying children presenters and make it seem overly dramatic. "And then the stocks crashed and went boom," he said loudly, waving his hands about. Since Yong-myong's accident, most Kang family businesses that involved my father had fallen in stock price. It wasn't surprising. Ever since the accident was revealed, the press had begun demonizing him. A nasty rumor spread. The media outlets branded Kang Jun-ki as the cursed husband, stating that any woman who lay with him was likely to die during childbirth or suffer the consequences. There was also another rumor saying that he plotted Yong-myong's death, since he was still in love with his high school sweetheart, my mother, and he had hated the arranged marriage. As rumors tend to do, they spun out of control until people were saying Kang Jun-ki was a maniac, a murderer who liked to kill his wives, and the Kang family was covering it all up. Madame Kang was obviously outraged by all the slander. and she did everything to try and control the media outlets, even bribery. But that didn't quell the rumors. She even wanted Junki to remarry, so that she could prove the rumors wrong. But she couldn't. Technically, Yongmyong was still alive, brain dead was not dead, and divorce went against the Kang family tradition. Even if a man was widowed in the Kang household, they must respect their deceased partner and never move on from them. That was the sole reason she had been against my mother's union with Junki. She was well aware of this tradition. And my father, well, Kang Junki didn't help matters. Apparently, Kang Seung didn't tell him about Yongmyong's accident until after they had come back from their overseas business trip. When Junki found out, apparently he had an awful mental breakdown, screaming, crying, kicking, and in the end, he passed out from the shock. At least that's what Minho had told me. I wish I could have seen it. I guess he really had liked Yongmyong to have been in such a state, and I guess in this case he had no one to blame. When Bin Sua died, he blamed me, since she died in childbirth. But with Yongmyong's accident, it was an accident. She tripped and fell down the stairs. His mental breakdown probably wasn't because he loved her, but more because he couldn't process the guilt, which made him freak out. He seemed to be that type of fragile man. His breakdown showed everyone how weak he really was. He had been in such a state that Kang Seung sent him abroad to recover away from the media, and he never returned even after a month. So of course the stock prices dropped. So the stock price went boom, I said while mimicking Minho's hand movements. Exactly, Minho danced about with joy. Young master is so intelligent. Oh, you really are the smartest. He rubbed me on the head and gave me a loving hug. Of course, I found the way that Minho babied me to be annoying, but I put up with it. It was better that he thought of me as a child. He would underestimate me, and he wouldn't question my thoughts too much, and he would listen to the suggestions I whispered into his ears, and eventually he would believe that my words were his thoughts. I was already wrapping him around my little finger. As I walked around with Minho, many of the servants greeted me fondly like they normally would, but there was an extra hint of respect in the way that they treated me. The bows were a bit lower, and instead of referring to me as Ho or Kang Ho, many called me Young Master. This was because, even though nothing had been confirmed, I had become the golden child in the Kang household. It wasn't stated, but everyone knew that I had unofficially become the heir to the Nam faction. Nobody really respected my father, and Kang Seung had many years of leadership still ahead of him, but I was a diamond. A child prodigy, polite, cute, and special. With Kang Cheon-sa disabled, I was likely going to be the next in line after Kang Seung. It was only natural. Of course, this idea distressed many people within the Nam faction. I heard the gossip from the servants, who repeated what their masters said like parrots. People are saying that Kang Seung will be the last Nam faction leader to be head of the whole family. The young master may be brilliant, but he's still an illegitimate child. A bastard can't become head of the household, even if he does one day become head of the Nam faction. This will be the end of the Nam faction's reign of power, to think they only got one shot at leadership. Perhaps because I was from a more Western background, I couldn't understand their fixation on legitimacy and illegitimacy. Just because my mother hadn't been married to Junki, I was suddenly not fit for leadership. Why did such a thing even matter? But to the people within the household and to the outside world, the issue of marriage seemed very prominent. They seemed to hinge on the fact to the point that people whispered about Kang Cheon-sa being heir, despite his paralysis. Just hearing people whisper about that irked me. How was being a bastard child worse than paralysis? I was still thinking this when I was introduced to Kang Cheon-sa for the first time. Workers brought him to the house carrying him, and there I saw a small child wrapped in cloth, smiling with an innocent face and cooing at me while waving his short little arms about. I instantly hated him. Chapter 19. Dragons. 2. I gazed upon the small and vulnerable individual with malice. You know, normally I don't care for young children too much. They're not my ideal type of prey. They're too easy to kill. If I had to deal with a child, I preferred to use them as a form of torture. For example, in the 80s, I kidnapped this gorgeous woman. She had been in some kind of domestic situation, and with her baby in her hand, she ran out into the middle of the road and stopped my car in the dead of night. She practically begged me to take her and drop her off at the next town. So I let her in. I drugged her, and I kept her in my dungeon for a few months. Now the screams of a woman being tortured are one thing, but have you ever heard the screams of a woman that has to watch her child? The child that she loves being tortured. It's a whole new level of chilling. It made me tremble all over, hearing her screeching. After I killed both of them, I had the best sleep. I woke up feeling refreshed and younger. I was in such a good mood and so satisfied. But I'm going off on a tangent. The point is, I don't kill babies or young children much because it doesn't give me a lot of joy. Yet the moment I saw Kang Cheon-sa, I felt bloodlust. He awakened a primal instinct within me. I felt a natural hatred towards him. Perhaps it was because of our relationship in the novel. We were natural enemies. Except in the story, Kang Ho was abused and ridiculed by Cheon-sa, constantly compared and belittled by him. But here the roles had reversed. Kang Cheon-sa was a helpless child that was now at my mercy. Do you know what's better than death? It's suffering. Suffering so sweet that death is the only reprieve. I had big plans for Cheon-sa. I couldn't get away with murdering him at that moment, but I could make his life hell. I extended my arms out to the servant. Can I hug my brother, please? I batted my eyes at her gently. All the workers went, "Aw." I'm sorry, young master. He's too big for you to hold, but you can give him a look and a hug. She crouched down to my height and brought Cheon-sa towards me. As I gazed at the newborn and patted his head slowly, I thought of all the ways I could make this dog bark. It was at that point that someone barged into the mansion. The sound of their steel-capped heeled shoes clicked on the marble floor. Each step was strong and purposeful. I looked up to see a tower of a man. He was huge, so tall that he had to bend his head to fit inside through the door. His long white beard reached the end of his golden tie. He wore an expensive black button-up wraparound suit. The buttons were made of gold. The hair on his head was also a shocking white that had been neatly combed back. He was handsome, intimidating, and rich. I was curious about his identity, but then I saw the cane in his hand, and wrapped around the cane was the insignia of the dragon. He was a member of the dragon group, and judging from the way the servants all bowed as he walked in, he must have been Yong Bon-hwa, the leader of the dragon group and Yong Myong's father. He paced around slowly, and then stared at the staircase and the marble flooring. So, this is where my little princess fell to her death. He scowled and then turned and looked at Kang Cheon-sa. Give the child to me. I will not allow my grandchild to be raised with such vermin. At that point, Madame Kang burst in. Bon-hwa, it's lovely to see you. You should have called in advance to say you were visiting, she said hurriedly. Call in advance, he laughed. Call you in advance? While I sat by my daughter's bedside for the last month, she was only visited by you and Kang Seung twice, and not once did that coward of a husband come to see her or the child. Do you really think I'm going to let you raise him here in the same house where his mother nearly died? You didn't even prepare a new place for him to live. We can, of course, prepare a new building straight away, she tried to reassure him. We were just so taken aback by all the events that transpired, and handling the backlash that we didn't have time to prepare one or even visit too much. And Jun Ki's in shock. He loved Yong Myong and he's trying to cope in his own way. He will come to visit eventually. Eventually? He scoffed at her words. Sure he will. I'm sure he cared so deeply beyond this contrived business arrangement. I don't care what you have to say. I'm taking my grandson. You can't. He's a Kang. He will be raised as one of ours and made an heir to this family. An heir? In his state? He sighed and shook his head. Children are just tools to you people. I don't care about your petty family politics. I'm going to take Cheon-sa with me to Sweden, and I'm going to get him the best treatment to heal his spine, and you will not stop me. His tone was final. He wasn't someone you could argue with, but Madame Kang still tried. Yong Myong married into our family. She is a Kang now. Her child is a Kang. This is kidnapping. Yong Bon-hwa didn't even bother arguing with her. He simply snapped his fingers. A smartly dressed woman emerged from his entourage. She took a piece of paper from her briefcase and handed it to Madame Kang. Actually, my lady, it is perfectly legal for this to occur. This is not kidnapping, but taking a child away from a dangerous environment and allowing him to go somewhere with medicine and treatment. He will also be with a legal guardian, as Lord Yongbonhua is his legal guardian since his mother and father cannot be accounted for. There are also adoption papers, transferring him from a Kang to a Yong, which Sir Kang Seung has already signed and agreed upon. Cheon-sa is now a dragon. Madame Kang read the document with shaking fingers. She glanced at the signature page and looked faint. Seung agreed to this? She couldn't believe it. He did, so now we will be leaving. Yongbonhua picked up Cheon-sa. As he did, he looked at me and bowed slightly. I'll apologize in my daughter's place, he whispered in my ear. She should have never done that to you. He stood up straight and turned to Madame Kang. The only reason I'm only taking Cheon-sa and not making more of a fuss is because I saw the CCTV tapes that led to Mayong's accident, and I know what she did. You should look after the only heir that you have, he said, and then he walked off. Watching Yongbonhua leave with Cheon-sa was like having sweet candy being stolen from me. I had so many plans for that mutt, yet they went up in flames so quickly. But it was now clear. I was the sole heir to the Nam faction of the Kang family, and no matter how much Madame Kang glared at me, that wouldn't change. Chapter 20. Justifications. I will never understand people who try to justify their murders. I did it for love, I killed for art, I murdered for justice, you know, those type of lines. At the end of the day, it's all just excuses. The reason you kill is because you can. Because you're succumbing to your innate most basic animal instinct, to hunt, to stalk, and to destroy. Millions of years of killing for survival doesn't just disappear with the turn of a generation and the insertion of laws and morals. Instincts can be regulated, but they never truly fade away. Of course, I understand why people make excuses. Not everyone can confront the carnal beast within them. Not everyone can admit that they enjoyed taking someone's life in the same way sportsmen can say they enjoy their sport. Excuses and justifications act as a barrier to protect their fragile mental state, to allow them to commit the cruelest of deeds and still feel some peace of mind. Justifications are for the weak. Min-ho was weak. He was the type that needed a justification for his actions. His justification for anything bad he did was karma. When he laughed at the sight of Yong Mayong sprawled at the bottom of the staircase, he justified it by seeing it as karma. What goes around comes around. In that way he could disguise his glee at Yong Mayong's suffering as something righteous. I instantly recognized that trait within him and made plans to manipulate him using it. All I needed to do was convince Min-ho that every action he committed was an act of karma. I would determine for him what was karmic justice, and he would serve my determinations and hence serve me. There were certain steps I had to take to do this. Firstly, I re-established his sense of morality. I made him believe that I was good and that everything and everyone against me was bad. That way those who did me wrong would deserve karma, and hence it would give Min-ho an excuse to do bad things to them. Re-establishing someone's sense of morality is the easy part. You just need to assert your presence in their head as a symbol of good. All I had to do was appear to Min-ho as a positive, someone kind, strong, responsible, and most of all right. The more I appeared to be a positive, a symbol of good to Min-ho, the more his moral compass would shift to my will, and eventually I would become his good. I didn't only do that to Min-ho, but to everyone at the Kang estate. Greeting the workers every day wasn't only to establish my popularity, but it was to mark me as a good and nice boy. With this image in people's heads, I became the moral good that could do no wrong, and hence when I actually did do wrong, they would overlook it, because their brains weren't able to easily accept the idea of their moral good doing anything bad. Let me explain this in simpler terms. Think of popular killers like Ted Bundy. If it wasn't for the victims that escaped, he might have gotten away with more murders, and not because he was particularly good at covering up his crimes, but because he was a charming and handsome and a charismatic young man. Nobody suspected, or rather, they didn't want to suspect him because he became their moral good, and they couldn't even fathom him doing anything wrong. It was the same for me in my youth. I must admit, in my last life as Daniel Slade, when I first started my killings, I was sloppy. I made obvious mistakes and left blatant evidence. But I got away with it not only because of luck, but also because I was the moral good, a young, nice priest, a man of the cloth. Even when I left the church, I still wore the collar. I always kept a smile, was warm, sociable and kind. Nobody suspects the wolf when it blends in with the sheep. It didn't take much for me to assert myself as good in Minho's eyes. I was already an innocent child, a victim of abuse and someone from a working-class background due to my mother. All things that Minho associated with good people. When I greeted the workers and did good deeds, and agreed with all the dumb things Minho said, I became a good person to him. But I still wasn't his moral compass, and to do that, I needed to take the second step. I needed to push him to a point where he saw me as his savior, his grace, and his hope. "Your second birthday is coming up, Ho. What do you want?" Kang Sung asked me as he bounced me on his knee. Since Yong Myong had taken a tumble down the stairs, a year had passed. Not much had changed in my day-to-day activities, but my security had definitely heightened. Being the only viable heir to the Nam faction caused all the focus of the faction to shift towards me. While Minho had become my personal butler, I also had 3 additional maids, Hee-jae, Kim Sung and Bae Nana. I was constantly monitored, pampered and played with, the slow and torturous life of a toddler. Initially, many in the Nam faction had been against me being named an heir due to the lack of my legitimacy, but soon enough they had no other choice but to accept it. Firstly, Kang Sung was overbearing. I don't know what he did or said, but he had most of the group singing to his tune and kissing up to me within days. Secondly, I was a bright and intelligent child. I passed every test that they could throw at me, from arithmetic to literature. I easily passed tests that were beyond my age group. Thirdly, I had picked the white cloth during my doljabi, marking me as special. It gave the faction no choice but to accept me. It also brought unwanted attention to me. Scientists specializing in child development came to see me, and I became the core of a thesis on genius babies. They found out I had an IQ of over 200 and I was easily named a child prodigy. There were even several articles written calling me the once-in-a-millennia genius. I received so much attention from the media and the press that Kang Sung even took me with him to events, carrying me around and introducing me to over-prominent rich businessmen who were curious about me. Of course, in reality, the tests were easy for me because I didn't have the mind of a child and, well, I'd always been a genius. I was always fast on my feet and a quick learner. Perhaps it was because I viewed the world differently. Contrary to popular opinion, someone who has sociopathic or psychopathic tendencies isn't naturally a genius. Being cold and rational doesn't mean you're intelligent, but I was an intelligent individual, and I always took pride in being smarter than everyone else in the room. As much as I liked to show off my intelligence, I hated the attention. There wasn't room to breathe under all the scrutiny. To make matters worse, ever since I saw Yong Myong's bleeding and broken body, I had felt that itch again. It came over me at random times and caused my whole body to twitch. I just wanted to kill someone so badly. This was why I needed to push Minho, to make him my loyal slave who would act as my hands and feet to do my bidding. He was almost ready. But he still needed a push. He needed something to chain him to me. At that moment I thought of an idea. I smiled up at Kang Sung. "Grandpa, I know what I want for my birthday."